The Arizona Territory did not welcome men, it merely tolerated them, and even that toleration was subject to sudden, violent revocation. The land here was a hammer of red rock and gray mesquite, beaten flat by a sun that shone with no particular malice, but with an indifference that was far more terrifying. To the south, the Dragoon Mountains rose up like the jagged teeth of a buried skull, purple in the twilight and brown in the noon glare. They looked close enough to touch, but a man could ride toward them for 2 days and feel as though he had not moved a single yard. It was a country of illusions. Water that wasn't there, shade that offered no cool, safety that existed only until the wind shifted. Cal Hart sat on the top rail of his corral, rolling a cigarette with fingers that were stained with fence tar and dust. He was a man built of hard angles, somewhere in his 30s, though the sun had etched lines around his eyes that belonged to an older soul. He did not look like a man who owned this land. He looked like he was currently losing a wrestling match with it. He lit the tobacco and watched the smoke drift toward the east, where the town of San Solano sat like a blister on the plain. His ranch, the Broken Spur, was 10,000 acres of dry scrub and stubborn cattle, a legacy bought with blood money after the war between the states. But the boundaries were shrinking. Every month, men in clean suits arrived from the territory capital with survey equipment. They would set up their tripods, squint through brass scopes, and tell Cal that his creek access was actually on government land, or that his northern pasture had been rezoned for failing to meet improvement quotas. It was a slow strangulation. Cal knew the feeling well. He had felt it at Shiloh, pinned under a dead horse while the air turned to lead. He had felt it 5 years ago when his brother, Thomas, had ridden into a box canyon and never ridden out. The official report said Apache raiders. Cal had found the body himself. The arrows were Apache, true enough, but the bullet in Thomas's back was a .44 caliber slug from a factory-made cartridge, the kind the Army issued, or the kind a cattle baron's hired gun bought by the box. Cal flicked the cigarette ash into the dust. He was quiet, controlled. A man who had learned that noise usually attracted the wrong kind of attention, but the silence in his head was loud tonight. Down in the valley, a dust cloud was moving. A posse. They were riding hard toward the ridge, rifles scabbarded but ready. Earlier that morning, Cal had stood in the back of the church in San Solano. The air inside had been stifling, smelling of stale hymnals and unwashed wool. The Reverend Thomas Albright, a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes burning with Old Testament fury, had pounded the pulpit until dust motes danced in the shafts of light. "The Philistines are upon us." The Reverend had shouted, his voice cracking. "They steal our herds. They murder our children in their cradles. The savage does not understand mercy, and so he shall receive none. The Lord gave this land to the righteous, not to the heathens who worship stone and shadow." The congregation had murmured in agreement. Cal had seen the faces of his neighbors, men he had branded cattle with, men who had shared coffee at his fire. Their faces were twisted into masks of frightened hate. Fear was a powerful thing. It could make a good man kill a stranger just to make his own hands stop shaking. But Cal knew the math didn't add up. The Apache bands in this sector, primarily the Chiricahua remnants led by a war chief named Gojo, were starving. They had been pushed onto a reservation strip that was mostly rock, dependent on government rations that arrived light or not at all. Starving men stole cattle to eat. They butchered them on the spot. They did not drive 300 head of prime beef into a box canyon and vanish without a trace. That took infrastructure. That took wagons. That took white men. Cal slid off the fence rail. His boots crunched on the gravel. He walked to the barn, his shadow stretching long and thin ahead of him. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling of hay and horse sweat. He moved to the back stall where a roan gelding stood dozing. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard under a stack of grain sacks was a ledger. Cal had taken it 3 days ago from the saddlebag of a drunken clerk outside the Indian Agency office. The clerk, a terrified little man named Higgins, had been weeping into his whiskey, talking about how he didn't want to go to hell for what they were doing. Cal pulled the ledger out. He didn't need to read it again. The numbers were burned into his mind. Government appropriations for 3,000 head of cattle to feed the reservation. Delivered, 600. Appropriations for 500 blankets. Delivered, 50. The rest? Sold. Diverted. The names attached to the accounts were coded, but Cal knew the handwriting. He had seen it on land deeds and eviction notices. Agent Silas Reed, and backing him, silent and massive as a thunderhead, was Cyrus Vance, the cattle baron who owned everything east of the river and wanted everything west of it. They were starving the Apaches to provoke a war. A war meant federal troops. Troops needed beef. Troops needed horses. Troops cleared the land of hostiles so men like Vance could sweep in and claim the water rights. It was a business. The war was just an expense report, and Gozo, the Apache leader, was falling for it. Or perhaps he had no choice. When your children are eating boiled leather to survive, pride is a luxury you cannot afford, and violence becomes the only language left. Cal shoved the ledger back into his coat pocket. He patted the roan's neck. "We are going for a ride," he told the horse softly. "And you are not going to like where we are going. 20 miles west." The landscape shifted from open scrub to broken canyons of red sandstone. Here, the shadows held teeth. This was the edge of the reservation, a place where the wind sounded like a woman weeping. In the center of a dry wash, a camp of 30 wickiups sat huddled against the canyon wall. The structures were brush and canvas, fragile shelters against a hard world. Smoke from small fires drifted straight up into the darkening sky. There was no sound of children playing. There was only the low murmur of voices and the occasional cough of a horse that was showing too much rib. Nayeli sat near the entrance of her wickiup, her hands busy mending a tear in a deer-hide legging. She was young, perhaps 24, with hair the color of a raven's wing and eyes that were dark and unreadable. She was beautiful in the way a cliff face is beautiful, striking, severe, and enduring. She paused, her needle hovering, and looked toward the center of the camp. A small group had gathered around a pile of stones, a cairn. Another one. This time it was the infant son of her cousin. The sickness had taken him in the night, a fever that burned hot and fast, fed by a body too weak from hunger to fight back. The rations had not come for 2 weeks. The agent, Reed, had told them the wagons were delayed by mud in the east, but the sky had been blue for a month. Nayeli felt a cold stone of anger in her stomach. It was a familiar weight. She carried it everywhere, along with the exhaustion that made her bones ache. She was the wife of Gozo. It was a position of honor. They said Gozo was a great warrior, a man who had killed blue-coat soldiers and Mexican raiders alike. He was nearly 50, his face a map of scars, his body thick and hard like an old oak tree. He had taken Nayeli as a wife 2 years ago to seal an alliance between their bands after her father was killed. It was not a marriage of softness. Gozo came out of the council lodge. He walked with a heavy, deliberate gait. He stopped by the fire where Nayeli sat. He did not look at her work. He looked at the horizon. His eyes narrowed against the dying light. The white men gather. Gozo said. His voice was like grinding stones. Their scouts were seen near the painted rock. Nayeli kept her eyes on her sewing. "What will we do? We will fight," Gozo said. "Better to die with a rifle in hand than to rot here waiting for their charity." He looked down at her then. His gaze was possessive, heavy. He did not see her. He saw a piece of his household, a symbol of his standing. If he was kind to her, it was the kindness one showed to a favored horse. If he was harsh, it was because the horse had stumbled. "They want us dead," Gozo said, spitting into the fire. "They steal the beef meant for us. They steal the land. Now they come to finish it." Nayeli snapped the thread with her teeth. "And if we fight, we have 20 rifles. They have an army." Gozo's hands shot out, grabbing her chin, forcing her to look up. His fingers were rough, calloused from war. Silence. "Woman," he hissed. "Do not speak of numbers. Speak of courage. You sound like the cowards who wish to surrender. I wish for us to live," Nayeli said, her voice steady despite the fear fluttering in her throat. She had learned this trick long ago. When the heart races, make the face stone. Living on knees is not living, Gojo said. He released her, almost shoving her back. Prepare food. The elders meet tonight. He walked away. Nayeli watched him go. She hated him, not with a burning passion, but with a dull, weary constant. She hated the smell of him, the weight of him in the night, the way he looked at her as if she were a vessel to be filled with his legacy. But more than that, she hated his blindness. He could see a deer track on stone from 50 yards, but he could not see that his pride was the very leash the white agent was using to lead him to slaughter. She stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. She walked to the edge of the camp. Looking east, the first stars were appearing, sharp and bright. Somewhere out there, the world was deciding their fate. She felt a strange shiver, a premonition that the wind was about to change. The parley was set for noon the next day, at a place called Bitter Springs. It was neutral ground, a patch of alkali flats where a trickle of water seeped from the rock, barely enough to muddy the dust. The sun was a white disk punched into the sky. The heat shimmered off the ground, making the distant figures look like ghosts wavering in the air. Cal rode in alone. He sat tall on the roan, his hands resting visibly on the horn of his saddle. He wore a dusty coat despite the heat, and a flat-brimmed hat pulled low. He felt the eyes on him long before he saw the men. On the north ridge, the posse from San Solano had gathered. 20 men, led by the sheriff, a man named Miller who was honest but weak, and flanked by several of Vance's hired hands who were neither. They held Winchesters and watched. On the south ridge, the Apache warriors sat on their ponies. They were painted for war, streaks of yellow and black on their chests. They held old carbines and lances. In the center, by the spring, Gojo waited. He was mounted on a spotted pony, surrounded by 3 of his sub-chiefs. Nayeli was there too, seated on a mare a few paces behind her husband. It was unusual for a woman to be at a parley, but Gojo had brought her to show his wealth, his stability. See, he seemed to say, I am a man with family. I am not a wild animal. Cal rode to the center. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the buzzing of flies and the scrape of a horseshoe on stone. He stopped his horse 10 yards from Gojo. The Apache leader stared at him. Gojo's face was unreadable, a mask of dark copper. You are the rancher Hart, Gojo said. His English was thick, guttural. You come to speak for the liars? I speak for myself, Cal said. His voice was calm, carrying easily in the still air. I speak for the land? The land is dying, Gojo said, because you cover it with fences. Cal looked up at the ridges. He saw the glint of sun on rifle barrels. He saw Agent Reed sitting on a buckboard wagon with the sheriff, mopping his sweating neck with a handkerchief. Reed was smiling, just slightly. He expected Cal to deliver an ultimatum. He expected Cal to say, return the cattle or we attack. That was the script. Cal looked back at Gojo. He looked at the starving men behind the chief. He looked, for a brief second, at the woman, Nayeli. She sat straight, her face impassive, but her eyes were alert. She was watching him with a fierce intelligence. Cal knew that what he was about to say would destroy his reputation. It would make him a pariah. It might get him killed before the sun went down. But it was the only way to stop the clock. He needed time. He needed a witness who could slip into the agency and verify the location of the stolen herd. Someone the Apaches trusted, but who could move in the white world for a day. He needed Nayeli, but he couldn't just ask for her. He had to buy the moment. He had to become the villain to save the hero. I know your people are hungry. Gojo, Cal said. Gojo stiffened. We do not need your pity. I am not offering pity, Cal said. I am offering a trade. The settlers on the ridge leaned in. Agent Reed stopped wiping his neck. I have 1,000 head of horses in my north pasture. Cal said. Good stock. Mustangs mixed with thoroughbred blood. Winter coats coming in. Enough to carry your people to the highlands. Enough to trade for blankets and rifles. Enough to make you rich men. Gojo frowned. He had not expected this. 1,000 horses was a fortune. A king's ransom. And what do you want for these horses? Gojo asked. You want our land? You want us to leave? No, Cal said. He took a breath. The air tasted of dust and sage. I want one night, Cal said clearly. Gojo's eyes narrowed. One night? With your wife, Cal finished. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. For 3 seconds, there was no sound at all. The world seemed to stop spinning. Then, the outrage broke. On the settler ridge, men gasped. Someone cursed loudly. Did you hear that filth? The sheriff looked stunned. Agent Reed's jaw dropped, his smile vanishing. It was monstrous. It was biblical sin. It was the most disgusting thing any of them had ever heard. On the Apache side, the warriors hissed. Hands went to knives. This was a mortal insult. To treat a wife like a blanket to be traded, it was a humiliation beyond words. Gozo's face turned a dark, violent red. He reached for the rifle across his lap. Nayeli felt the blood drain from her face. Her stomach twisted into a knot of cold sickness. She looked at the white rancher, her mind reeling with shock and fury. She had expected threats. She had expected hate. She had not expected this degradation. To be bought, to be spoken of as a whore in front of the elders. In front of the enemy? She gripped her reins, ready to turn and ride, ready to scream. But then she looked at Cal Hart. He was sitting perfectly still. His hands were away from his gun. He was not leering. He was not smiling. He was looking at Gojo. But for a split second, his eyes flicked to hers. They were not the eyes of a predator. They were wide, intense, and terrified. They were the eyes of a man who had just jumped off a cliff and was praying the water was deep enough. He pleaded with her, silently. Understand, his eyes said, please, understand. Gojo roared, pulling his rifle free. You dog! You filth! I will cut your tongue out! Cal didn't flinch. He kept his voice steady, though it had a razor edge to it now. 1,000 horses. Gojo, think. Your children are dying. You can kill me. Sure, but then your people starve. Or you can swallow your pride for one night and save them. The other Apache elders froze. Gojo hesitated. The rifle barrel wavered. Hunger was a cruel master. 1,000 horses. It meant survival. It meant power. The settlers were shouting now. Kill him! Use the rope! He's gone savage! Sheriff Miller rode down the slope, waving his hat. Break it up! Break it up, damn you! Hart, get out of here! You've lost your mind! Agent Reed was yelling something about decency. But Cal saw the look in Reed's eyes. Confusion. This wasn't the script. This wasn't the war cry Reed wanted. This was something strange, something messy. Gojo looked at Cal, then at the horses, then at Nayeli. A terrible calculation was happening behind his eyes. He lowered the rifle slowly, though his finger stayed on the trigger. Get out, Gojo spat. Before I kill you where you sit. The offer stands until sunset tomorrow, Cal said. He turned his horse. He did not look back. He rode through the jeering cries of his neighbors, past the shocked silence of the sheriff, and toward the open desert. He could feel the target painted on his back. Nayeli sat frozen on her mare. The shame burned her skin like fire. Every man was looking at her. The settlers looked at her with disgust. Her own people looked at her with pity and calculation. She felt dirty. She felt used. But she could not forget the rancher's eyes. He had not looked at her body. He had looked at her intelligence. Why? The question hammered in her mind. Why would a man offer a fortune to destroy his own name? Why would he invite death for a sin he hadn't even committed yet? Gojo turned his pony violently, whipping it around. We leave, he shouted, as the band turned back toward the canyon. Nayeli glanced one last time at the solitary figure of Cal Hart disappearing into the heat haze. He rode with his shoulders slumped, like a man carrying the weight of the world. He was planning something that required him to be a monster so that something else could happen. She touched the hidden knife at her waist. If he thinks he can buy me, she thought, he will find that I am not a blanket to be sold. I am the daughter of the mountains. But deep down, beneath the anger, a strange curiosity took root. In a world of men who lied to make themselves look big, this man had told a lie to make himself look small. And that Niley realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. The wind picked up, howling through the mesquite, carrying the scent of rain that would not fall. The sun began to dip toward the jagged line of the dragoons, turning the sky the color of a bruise. War was coming. But for the first time in months, the game had changed. The board had been kicked over. Cal Hart rode on, his hand trembling slightly as he lit another cigarette. He took a drag and exhaled, watching the smoke vanish instantly in the wind. "God forgive me," he whispered to the empty desert. But God was not listening. Only the coyotes were, and they began to yip and howl as the darkness fell, laughing at the foolishness of men who thought they could trade horses for destiny. The night would be cold, and tomorrow the bill would come due. The windmill at the broken spur groaned in the pre-dawn dark, a metal shriek that sounded like a dying animal. It was turning, but it was pulling up nothing but air and brown silt. The water table had dropped another foot in the last month, retreating into the earth as if hiding from the men who fought over the surface. Cal Hart sat on the porch step, a tin cup of bitter coffee in his hand. He watched the east, waiting for the gray line of morning to crack the sky. His ranch was a skeleton. The corrals were made of sun-bleached cedar that splintered to the touch. The main house was sturdy but scarred, the paint peeled away by years of wind that carried sand sharp enough to scour glass. He had 3 hired hands left. 2 were young drifters who would move on when the work got too hard or the pay got too thin. The third was Luis, a vaquero who had ridden with Cal's father and possessed a face made of tanned leather and patience. Luis came out of the bunkhouse, rolling a cigarette. He walked with the bow-legged gait of a man who had spent 40 years in a saddle. He stopped by the porch, struck a match on his boot heel, and lit the tobacco. "The boys are talking," Luis said quietly. He did not look at Cal. He looked at the dry water trough. "Let them talk," Cal said. "They say you have lost your mind. Patron, they say you offered the whole herd for a savage woman. They say the bank will come for the land before the week is out if you give away the stock." Cal took a sip of the coffee. It was cold. "If the bank wants the land, they can come and dig the wells themselves. There is nothing here but debt and dust." Luis turned his head slowly. "You are not a fool. Cal, you do not throw away 1,000 horses for lust. I remember you when you were a boy. You were afraid to speak to the girls at the church dance. You are not this man." Cal looked up at his friend. The old man's eyes were dark and shrewd. Luis knew him too well. "It is bait, Luis," Cal said, his voice lowering to a whisper that the wind could not carry. "Bait for who? For the agent? For Reed?" Luis exhaled a long plume of smoke. "You play a dangerous game. You make yourself a monster so the real monster will step out of the shadows." "He stepped out a long time ago," Cal said. "He just wears a suit while he does it. I need to get close to the Apache elders. I need them to trust me, but I cannot walk into their camp without getting shot, and they cannot come here without the town hanging them." "So you buy a night," Luis said, the distaste evident in his tone. "To talk, to show them the ledger," Cal said. "To show them where their cattle went. To show them that the war coming down on their heads is a business deal, not a judgment from God." Luis was silent for a long time. The windmill shrieked again. "The woman," Luis said finally. "Does she know she is the key to the door?" "No," Cal said. "And that is the part that will send me to hell. Luis." Luis dropped the cigarette and crushed it into the dirt. "We are already in hell, Patron. You are just trying to turn down the heat." In the canyon of the Chiricahua, the dawn brought no relief. The air remained heavy, trapped between the red walls. The camp was awake, buzzing with a tension that felt like static before lightning. The news of the rancher's offer had spread like a fever. It was debated at every fire. It was whispered by the women as they scraped hides, and argued by the men as they checked their weapons. To the young warriors, men whose blood ran hot, and who had never known a time of peace, the offer was a declaration of war. They wanted to ride to the broken spur and burn it to the ground. They wanted to drag the white man behind a horse until there was nothing left of him. But the elders were pragmatic. They looked at the winter stores, which were empty. They looked at the horses grazing on the sparse grass, rib-thin ponies that would not last the first snow. 1,000 horses. It was a number that defied comprehension. With 1,000 horses, they could trade, they could travel, they could survive. Gojo sat in his lodge, cross-legged on a pile of furs. He was cleaning his rifle, the oil rag moving in slow, rhythmic circles. Nayeli sat across from him, grinding corn in a stone metate. The rasping sound of stone on stone was the only noise in the lodge. "He shames us," Gojo said, his voice low, but he offers power. Nayeli did not look up. She focused on the rhythm. "Push, pull, grind the kernel, break the husk. You are considering it," she said. Gojo stopped cleaning. He looked at her. His eyes were hard, devoid of affection. He saw her not as a person, but as an extension of his own will. "If I refuse, the people starve." Gojo said, "If I agree, I look like a man who sells his wife, so you are worried about how you look." Nayeli said, stopping the stone. "Not about what it is." Gojo stood up, his movement sudden and violent. He crossed the small space and loomed over her. "Do not speak to me of what it is. You are a woman. You are here to serve the band. If your shame buys food for the children, is that not a worthy trade?" Nayeli looked up at him. She saw the calculation in his face. He was already spending the horses in his mind. He was already planning how he would frame this to the others, that he was a great leader making a sacrifice, that he was tricking the stupid white man. "And what of me?" Nayeli asked softly. "After the night is over?" Gojo sneered. "After? You will be unclean. I will have to purify you, perhaps with the whip, to drive the white man's stink off you." A cold calmness settled over Nayeli. She realized then that Gojo did not hate the offer because it hurt her. He hated it because it challenged his ownership. He would agree to the deal, take the horses, and then he would punish her for his own decision. She went back to grinding the corn. The sound was louder now, stone-crushing grain. "I will do what is needed," she said. Gojo watched her for a moment, looking for rebellion, looking for fear. He saw only the top of her head and the rhythmic motion of her arms. He grunted and left the lodge. Nayeli waited until the flap closed. Then she stopped. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against the cool stone of the metate. She was terrified. Not of the rancher. She remembered his desperate eyes, but of the trap closing around her. She was a piece on a board, moved by men who thought the world belonged to them. But even a pawn can change the game, she thought, if it survives long enough. The second meeting took place 3 days later. This time, the location was closer to the canyon mouth, a spot where the mesquite grew thick and the ground was broken by dry ravines. Cal arrived driving a wagon. He had no escort. He had told Luis to stay back. This had to be done alone. The wagon was loaded not with horses, but with sacks. The Apache party was waiting. Gojo was there, along with 2 elders, gray-haired men with faces like dried riverbeds, and a dozen warriors. Nayeli was there too, standing by the horses, wrapped in a blanket that covered her from neck to ankles. Cal stopped the wagon and set the brake. He stepped down, keeping his hands open and away from his waist. "I brought a token," Cal said, "to show good faith." He pulled a knife from his belt and slit the top sack. White salt spilled out, glistening in the sun. He slit the next one, coffee beans, dark and oily. The third sack held tins of peaches. The smell of the coffee hit the air, rich and strong. The warriors shifted. It had been months since they had smelled real coffee. "This is not payment," Cal said, addressing the elders directly. "This is a gift. The horses are waiting at the line shack near the Needle Rock." One of the elders, a man named Cochise, not the great chief, but a cousin who carried the name, stepped forward. He looked at the salt. He dipped a finger in it and tasted it. "Why?" the elder asked. "Why do you do this? White Eyes? You have land. You have cattle. Why do you want this woman?" Cal looked at Nayeli. She was watching him, her face framed by the blanket. Her eyes were dark pools of judgment. Because I am a lonely man. Cal lied. His voice was flat, rehearsing the script he had written for the hidden audience. And because I have heard she is the heart of your people, I want to see if the stories are true. Gojo stepped forward. He kicked the sack of salt. You think we are dogs? You throw us scraps? I think you are hungry, Cal said. And I think you are smart. He walked closer to the elders, lowering his voice so that only they and Gojo could hear. Listen to me, he said. The Indian agent has men on the ridge. They are watching through glass. If I hand you anything other than a trade, they will call it an alliance and send the cavalry to burn us both out. They understand greed. They do not understand mercy. The elder narrowed his eyes. You speak in riddles. I speak in survival, Cal said. I need to speak to her. Alone. I have things to tell you that I cannot say while the agent's spies are watching. The elder looked at Gojo. Gojo looked at the horses. You ask for her, Gojo said loudly. For the benefit of his warriors. You pay the price? 1,000 horses, Cal said. Delivered in 3 groups, 300 today, 300 at midnight, 400 at dawn. If I touch her without her consent, or if I harm her, you keep the horses and you kill me. Gojo looked at Nayeli. Come here, he commanded. Nayeli walked forward. The sand was soft under her moccasins. She stopped 3 paces from the white man. She smelled the dust on his coat and the tobacco smoke. She saw the scar that ran down his jawline, white against the stubble. Do you agree to this? The elder asked her. It was a formality, but a necessary one. Nayeli looked at Cal. Up close. The desperation in his eyes was even clearer. He was pleading with her again. Help me stop this. His eyes said, Help me. She looked at Gojo. He was smiling, a cruel, tight smile. I want my people to eat, Nayeli said clearly. Her voice did not tremble. I will go. Gojo nodded. Take her. But know this, rancher. If she does not return by sunrise, the desert will not be big enough to hide you. The transfer of the horses was a chaotic, thundering reality that silenced the mockery of the settlers. Cal had hired 3 Mexican drovers from down south, men who didn't care about local politics, to drive the first herd. They came over the rise in a cloud of dust that turned the sun blood red. 300 horses, wild-eyed Mustangs, sturdy quarter horses, unbroken colts. The ground shook. The noise was a physical weight. The drumming of 1,200 hooves, the whinnying, the cracks of the whips. The settlers who had gathered on the distant bluffs to watch the show fell silent. They had come to see a scandal. Instead, they were seeing a fortune poured into the sand. That man is crazy, someone whispered. That's $5,000 in horse flesh? For a squaw? Another man spat. It ain't right. It's against nature. But the sheer scale of it stopped them from interfering. It was too big. It felt like an act of God, or the devil. Cal watched the herd flow into the box canyon where the Apaches waited. He saw the young warriors whooping, riding alongside the new stock, their faces lit with a joy that had been absent for years. He felt a sickness in his gut. He was buying their trust with stolen property. These horses were technically his, but if the bank knew, they would hang him as a thief. He was gambling everything on a single night of truth. He rode to where Nayeli stood waiting. A fresh horse was saddled for her. Ride with me, he said. She mounted with a fluid grace. She did not look at him. She looked straight ahead. They rode away from the noise, toward the high country where Cal's line cabin sat nestled in a grove of stunted pine. 2 of Gozo's scouts followed them, keeping a distance of 100 yards. Their rifles across their saddles. They would watch the cabin all night. The line cabin was a single room of rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud. It smelled of pine pitch and old wood smoke. Cal opened the door and stood back. Nayeli walked in. She stood in the center of the room, her hands at her sides. She did not look like a captive. She looked like a queen inspecting a prison cell. Cal entered and closed the door. He slid the wooden bolt into place. The silence in the room was sudden and deafening. Outside, the wind whispered in the pines. Inside, the only sound was their breathing. Cal moved to the table and lit a kerosene lantern. The golden light pushed back the shadows, revealing a cot in the corner, a wood stove, and a simple table with 2 chairs. He turned to face her. He took off his hat and set it on the table. Nayeli watched him. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she kept her face smooth. "So," she said. Her voice was cold, sharp as obsidian. "The great man has his prize." Cal flinched. He looked pained. "Please, don't what?" Nayeli asked. She took a step toward him, her anger finally cracking the surface. "Don't speak the truth. You bought me. You humiliated me before my husband and my enemies. You made me a whore in the eyes of the territory so you could sit here and— What? Look at me?" She tore the blanket from her shoulders and threw it on the floor. "Is this what you wanted?" she demanded. "A trophy?" "No," Cal said. He held up his hands, palms out. "Nayeli, stop, please. Do not tell me to stop," she hissed. "You white men take everything. You take the water. You take the land. Now you think you can take our dignity with horses?" She was shaking now, the fury pouring out of her. Cal reached into his coat pocket. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. "I did not bring you here to touch you," he said. His voice was rough with emotion. "I brought you here because you are the only one who can read English well enough to understand what this is." He threw the papers on the table. Nayeli stopped. She looked at the papers, then at him. "What is this?" Cal pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. "It is the reason your children are dying," he said. Nayeli hesitated. The anger was still hot in her veins, but curiosity was cooling it. She walked to the table. She looked down at the top page. It was a ledger sheet. It had the seal of the Indian Bureau at the top. Date, October 14th. Appropriation, 400 head. Destination, San Solano Reservation. Actual delivery, 0. Diverted to CV, Ranch Holding Pen. Nayeli read the line again. C.V. Cyrus Vance, the cattle baron. She flipped the page. There were lists of blankets, flour, rifles. All marked as delivered by the agent. All diverted to private sellers or Vance's warehouses. She looked up at Cal. Her eyes were wide. "They are stealing it all," she whispered. "Every bit of it," Cal said. "Agent Reed and Vance. They starve you to make you desperate. They want you to raid the settlements. They want the newspapers to scream about the savage Apache menace. Why? Because if there is a war," Cal said, leaning forward, "the army comes. If the army comes, they need beef. Vance has the beef. He gets the contracts. And once the army clears you out, Vance gets the water rights to the canyon." Nayeli sank into the other chair. The enormity of it washed over her. It wasn't just hatred. It was profit. Her cousin's baby hadn't died because of bad luck. He had died because a man in a suit wanted to sell beef to a regiment that wasn't there yet. "You stole these?" she asked. "I took them from the clerk," Cal said, "but papers are just paper. If I take this to the judge in Tucson, it will disappear. Reed has friends everywhere." "So what do we do?" Nayeli asked. The "we" slipped out before she could stop it. Cal heard it. He looked at her, and for the first time, the desperate tension in his face softened into something else, something dangerously vulnerable. "I need a witness," he said. "I need someone who can testify to the starvation, who can stand up in a court, not a local court, but a federal hearing, and verify that these supplies never arrived." "Me?" Nayeli shook her head. "They will not listen to an Apache woman. They will if she is standing next to a white rancher who is willing to lose everything to prove she is telling the truth," Cal said. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "That is why I made the offer. Nayeli, I had to make a spectacle. I had to make everyone look at us. If I just rode into your camp, I'd be dead. If we met in secret, they'd say we were plotting a raid. But this ugly, loud, public deal, it gives us a cover. Everyone thinks I'm a pervert who bought a wife. No one thinks I'm a traitor collecting evidence." Nayeli looked at the hand near hers. It was a worker's hand, scarred and calloused. You destroyed your name, she said quietly. To help us. I don't care about my name, Cal said. I saw enough death in the war. I saw my brother shot in the back for this same land. I won't watch them slaughter a tribe for money. Nayeli looked into his face. The lantern light cast deep shadows in the hollows of his cheeks. She saw the exhaustion, but she also saw a steel spine. He was telling the truth. She felt the anger drain away, replaced by a strange, hollow ache. She had spent her life fighting men who wanted to conquer her. Here was a man who had destroyed himself to arm her. So the one night is a lie, she said. It's a mask. Cal said. Nayeli sat back. She looked at the log walls. If I take this proof back to the elders, Gojo will want to go to war immediately. Then you must convince him to wait, Cal said. We need to catch Reed in the act. There is a shipment of rifles supposed to arrive next week. If we can intercept it, prove the serial numbers match the stolen army crates. That is the nail in the coffin. Nayeli nodded slowly. She reached out and touched the ledger. It felt cold. I will help you, she said, but not for you, for the child who died last week. I understand, Cal said, and, Nayeli added, her voice hardening again. Do not think this buys you forgiveness. The insult, the words you spoke, they cut deep. I know, Cal said. He looked down at his hands. I'm sorry. I did not know how else to break the door down. Nayeli watched him. The silence stretched again, but it was different now. It was not the silence of enemies. It was the silence of two people standing on a ledge, looking down into a fire. The wind howled outside, rattling the door. The scouts would be out there, shivering in the cold, watching the smoke from the chimney. We have until dawn, Nayeli said. Cal stood up and walked to the stove. He picked up the coffee pot. Then we should plan, he said, because when the sun comes up, the whole world is going to try to kill us. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed. It was a small contact, a fraction of a second. But Nayeli felt a shock go through her arm. She looked up, startled. Cal froze. He looked at her, and the professional distance he had been maintaining crumbled. He saw her. Not the Apache wife, not the victim, not the witness. He saw Nayeli. He saw the strength in her jaw, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, and he realized, with a jolt of pure terror, that the lie was not entirely a lie. He wanted her. He wanted her with a sudden, fierce ache that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the loneliness that had been eating him alive for 5 years. He pulled his hand back as if burned. I will sleep on the floor, he said abruptly, turning away. You take the cot. Nayeli watched him retreat to the far side of the room. She held the warm cup in her hands. She felt the same strange current echoing in her own skin. She took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and strong. She looked at the man spreading a blanket on the rough planks. He was an enemy. He was a fool. He was the only hope her people had, and for the first time in her life, she wondered what it would be like to be wanted by a man who asked for nothing but the truth. Tell me about the rifles, she said. Cal stopped adjusting the blanket. He looked back at her from the shadows. We have to ride into Hell's Canyon to get them, he said. Nayeli nodded. Then we ride. Outside, the moon rose over the dragoons, washing the brutal landscape in silver light. The horses in the corral nickered softly. The world was waiting for the sun to rise, unaware that the fire had already been lit in a small cabin at the edge of the world. The wind arrived in November, and it did not leave. It was a living thing, a rasping, invisible animal that chewed on the eaves of the houses and scoured the flesh from the land. It carried the alkali dust from the flats, grinding it into the creases of men's faces and the coats of the horses until everything, man, beast, and wood, was the same shade of gray ghost color. It was a killing season. The water holes in the dragoon foothills were shrinking into muddy scabs. The cattle were listless, standing with their tails to the wind, heads low, waiting for a mercy that the sky refused to give. Cal Hart rode with his scarf pulled up over his nose, his hat jammed low. The grit was everywhere. It was in his teeth, a constant grinding sensation. It was in the cracks of his lips, which split and bled when he smiled. though he had little reason to smile these days. He met Nayeli in the shadow of a basalt overhang 5 miles from the reservation line. It was a foolish place to meet, exposed to anyone watching from the high ridges. But the wind offered a strange sort of cover. No one with any sense was out in this weather. She was waiting for him, standing beside her mare. She looked thinner. The hunger in the camps was carving her down, sharpening the angles of her cheekbones. She wore a heavy woolen serape, likely traded from the horses Cal had sent, but she shivered despite it. Cal dismounted. His horse, a bay with a white stocking, was lathered and trembling, its sides heaving against the cinch. "You pushed him hard," Nayeli said. Her voice was snatched away by the wind, forcing her to speak loudly. "I had to shake a tail," Cal said. He loosened the girth strap to let the animal breathe. 2 of Miller's deputies were watching the road. "They think I am running guns now. They are not far wrong," Nayeli said. She stepped closer to him. The space between them was charged, a magnetic field generated by danger and the unspoken memory of the cabin. Cal looked at her, really looked at her, scanning her face for bruises. He knew Gojo was angry. The horses had bought food, yes, but they had also bought resentment. Every time an Apache warrior swung onto one of Cal's Mustangs, he was reminded that his survival depended on a white man's charity. And Gojo took that humiliation out on the nearest available target. "Are you safe?" Cal asked. Nayeli looked away, toward the gray horizon. "I am alive. Safe is a word for children." Cal reached out, an instinctive move to touch her arm, to offer comfort. Nayeli flinched. It was a small movement, a sharp retraction of her shoulder, as if she expected a blow. She caught herself instantly, forcing her posture straight. But Cal had seen it. He froze, his hand hovering in the air. He saw the reflex of a whipped dog. He saw the history of a marriage written in that single, jerking motion. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hand. He did not touch her. He stepped back, giving her air. "I am sorry," he said. The words were inadequate, heavy with a guilt that wasn't his but felt like it should be. Nayeli looked at him then. She saw him scanning the ridge, his eyes darting to the rocks, his hand drifting near the revolver at his hip. He stood like a man who expected a bullet to come out of the empty air. "You carry ghosts too," she said. "You watch the skyline like you are still in the war. The war never ended." Cal said, "It just changed locations." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small sack. Jerky, dried beef. He handed it to her. "Eat," he said. "I will take it to the children," she said, tucking it into her serape. "Eat half," Cal commanded. His voice was rougher than he intended. "If you fall out of the saddle, you are no use to the plan." Nayeli looked at him, and for a second, a spark of amusement lit her dark eyes. It was a fleeting thing, a ghost of a girl she might have been before the world hardened her. "You sound like a husband," she said. "God forbid," Cal said dryly. A sudden, sharp laugh escaped her. It was a shocking sound in the desolate canyon, bright and clear. Cal smiled, the skin of his lip cracking, but he didn't care. For a moment, just one heartbeat. They were not a rancher and a hostage, not enemies, not conspirators. They were just 2 people standing in the wind, finding a reason to endure. The moment broke when the wind howled, throwing a handful of gravel against the rock wall. "We have to move," Cal said, the lightness vanishing. "Reed is making his play, I know." Nayeli said, "The agent has been meeting with the young men. He tells them the great father in Washington has sent gold, but the ranchers have stolen it. He tells them that if they are men, they will take it back. He is baiting a trap," Cal said. "There is a supply wagon coming through the pass tomorrow night. Reed's ledger says it is carrying flour and blankets, but my source in town says it is empty. He wants your braves to attack it. If they attack an empty wagon." Nayeli started. Then the headlines read, "Savage attack on innocent freighters." Cal finished. "And the army gets the excuse they need to clear the canyon." Nayeli's face hardened. "Gojo prepares a war party. He says he will burn the wagon. We have to stop him?" Cal said. "Or we have to get there first." He stepped closer again. The wind whipped her hair across her face. He reached up, without thinking, and brushed the strands away from her eyes. His fingers grazed her cheek. His skin was rough, calloused from rope and wire, but his touch was terrified in its gentleness. Nayeli went still. She did not flinch this time. She leaned into his hand, just a fraction of an inch. The heat of his palm against her cold skin was a shock that went straight to her marrow. Cal stared at her. The air between them thickened, heavier than the dust. He wanted to pull her into him. He wanted to wrap his coat around her and shield her from the wind and the husband and the agent and the inevitable end of things. He leaned in, his breath hitching. The sound of a horseshoe striking stone echoed down the canyon. Cal spun, his gun clearing leather in a blur of motion. Nayeli dropped to a crouch, her hand finding the knife at her belt. A coyote trotted out from behind a boulder, looked at them with yellow, indifferent eyes, and vanished into the brush. Cal let out a long, shaky breath. He holstered the gun, but the moment was gone, shattered by the reality of where they were. "Go," he said, his voice flat. "Tell the elders to wait. Tell them I will bring them the wagon myself." Nayeli mounted her horse. She looked down at him. "Do not die." "Calhart," she said, "I am trying not to," he said. The tragedy did not wait for the wagon. It arrived the next morning, carried on the back of a mule. A group of prospectors riding into San Solano found the body in a ravine near the Broken Spurs fence line. It was a young Apache scout, a boy of 16 named Chayton. He had been a gentle spirit, known for carving wooden flutes and playing them when the camp was quiet. He had been shot 3 times, and he had been scalped. The prospectors brought the body into town, draped over the mule like a sack of grain. By noon, the story had twisted. The men in the saloon were saying the boy had been caught trying to rape a settler's daughter. They said he had been cutting fences. They said he got what he deserved. But in the Apache camp, the grief was a physical blow. Chayton's mother wailed, cutting her hair and gashing her arms in mourning. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a raw, jagged scream that demanded blood. Gojo stood over the body. He did not weep. He looked at the boy's wounds. Then he looked at Nayeli. "This is your friend's work," Gojo said. His voice was a quiet rumble, like thunder miles away. "He did not do this," Nayeli said. She felt sick. She had known Chayton. He had smiled at her when she rode out to meet Cal. He was found on the rancher's land. Gojo said, "The white men kill us for sport. And you spread your legs for the butcher." He backhanded her. It was a fast, brutal blow that knocked her into the dirt. Nayeli tasted copper. She did not cry out. She pushed herself up, wiping the blood from her lip. "You use his death to hurt me," she said, spitting the blood onto the ground. "You are small, Gojo, small and afraid." Gojo stepped toward her, his hand raised again, but the wailing of the mother stopped him. He lowered his hand. "Tonight," he said, "tonight we ride. And when we return, you will see whose blood is redder." Cal heard the news from Luis when he rode back to the ranch. The old vaquero was waiting by the gate, a shotgun across his arm. "They are saying your boys killed an Indian kid," Luis said. "The town is ready to riot." "I have no boys left," Cal said, dismounting. "Just you and the drift hires. Did they do it?" Luis shook his head. "They were fixing the windmill all day. This is Reed's work. He kills a pawn to take the queen." Cal cursed, slamming his hat against his leg. He walked to the water trough and splashed his face. The water was warm and tasted of algae. "We have to go to town," Cal said. "Town?" Luis looked at him like he was mad. "Patron, if you go to San Solano today, they will string you up. They are calling you a traitor. They say you are arming the hostiles. If I hide here, I admit guilt," Cal said. "Saddle the fresh horses." They rode into San Solano an hour later. The main street was crowded. Men stood in knots on the boardwalks, their voices loud and angry. When they saw Cal, the noise died down, replaced by a sullen, dangerous silence. Cal rode straight down the middle of the street. He kept his eyes forward, his back straight. He could feel the hate radiating from the buildings. It was a tangible pressure, like walking underwater. A tomato flew from an alleyway, splattering against his horse's flank. Cal did not turn. He reached the sheriff's office and dismounted. Sheriff Miller was standing on the porch, looking unhappy. "You shouldn't be here." "Cal," Miller said, "I want to see the body." Cal said, "It's gone. The kin came and took it." Cal looked at the sheriff. "Who shot him? Miller?" Miller shifted his weight. "Folks say it was your hands. Folks say the earth is flat." Cal said, "My hands were fixing a pump. This was murder. Miller, to start a war. And you know it." "I know the town is scared," Miller shouted, his composure cracking. "They see you giving horses to the enemy. They see you meeting that squaw in the hills. They think you've turned against your own kind." "My kind don't shoot 16-year-old boys," Cal said quietly. A commotion erupted at the end of the street. A shout, then the sound of breaking glass. Cal turned. A small wagon had been cornered near the livery stable. It was an Apache family, an old man, a woman, and 2 small children. They had likely been trading baskets before the mood turned. Now, a mob of 20 men had them surrounded. "Get the rope," someone yelled. "String 'em up! Retribution!" Cal didn't think. He didn't weigh the odds. He vaulted onto his horse and spurred it hard. The roan leapt forward, scattering the men on the edge of the crowd. Cal drove the horse straight into the center of the mob, placing himself between the terrified family and the settlers. "Back off!" Cal roared. He pulled his revolver, pointing it at the sky. The mob surged back, startled. Then they recognized him. "It's the Indian lover," a man in a blacksmith's apron shouted. Cal's horse danced nervously. "Go!" Cal yelled to the Apache man. "Get out of here!" The family whipped their mule, the wagon clattering away toward the open desert. The mob turned its attention to Cal. "You choose them over us?" a man screamed. A rock struck Cal in the shoulder. Then another hit his horse. The roan reared, terrified. Cal lost his seat, crashing into the dust. Before he could rise, they were on him. It was a blur of boots and fists. Cal curled into a ball, protecting his head. He felt a rib crack. He tasted dust and blood. The anger of the town was pouring into him. Every kick a punishment for his perceived betrayal. Enough. The boom of a shotgun silenced the street. Luis stood on the boardwalk, the double-barreled weapon leveled at the crowd. "The next man who kicks him dies," Luis said. His voice was calm, conversational even. The mob hesitated. The bloodlust cooled as the reality of the shotgun sank in. They stepped back, leaving Cal lying in the dirt. Cal groaned and rolled onto his back. The sky was spinning. He spat a mouthful of blood. He looked at the faces of his neighbors. He saw fear. He saw hate. But he also saw shame in the eyes of a few. He dragged himself up, using the hitching post for support. He wiped his face with his sleeve. It came away red. "You are fools," Cal rasped. "All of you. You are doing exactly what they want." He limped toward his horse, which Luis had caught. He pulled himself into the saddle, every movement a jagged spike of pain. "Let's go," he said to Luis. Night fell like a hammer. The wind increased, screaming through the canyons at 40 miles an hour. It was a perfect night for a robbery. Cal and Nayeli met at the pass 3 hours after sunset. Cal was moving stiffly, his left eye swollen shut, his ribs wrapped tight with strips of linen. Nayeli saw his face in the moonlight and hissed. "Gosho?" she asked, touching the bruise on his cheek. "My neighbors," Cal said. He grimaced as he checked his cinch. "I tried to stop them from hanging a basket weaver. They took exception." "You are a fool," Nayeli said, but her voice lacked its usual edge. It was thick with something else. Respect? Fear for him? "We have to be quick," Cal said. "The wagon is coming." They had positioned themselves at a narrow choke point in the trail. The plan was simple and dangerous. Stop the wagon. Check the cargo. If it was rifles, burn it. If it was rations, take proof. The rumble of wheels approached. A heavy freight wagon, drawn by 6 mules, rounded the bend. 2 outriders with rifles rode ahead. Cal signaled. He and Nayeli rode out from the rocks, handkerchiefs tied over their faces. Luis was on the ridge above, firing a warning shot that sparked off the stone in front of the lead mule. "Hold up!" Cal shouted. The Teamsters, hired men who didn't get paid enough to die, threw up their hands instantly. The Outriders hesitated, looking up at the invisible riflemen on the ridge, then lowered their weapons. "Don't shoot!" the driver yelled. "We're just hauling flour. Get down!" Cal ordered. Nayeli kept her rifle trained on the men while Cal dismounted. He moved to the back of the wagon. He climbed up, wincing as his ribs protested. He slashed open a sack. White flour spilled out. He checked another. Beans. He dug deeper, throwing sacks aside. Beneath the food, he found a crate. He pried the lid open with his knife. It was not rifles. It was blankets. But on the side of the crate was a stamp. U.S. Department of Interior, Chiricahua Agency. And stapled to the manifest was a bill of sale. Sold to C. Vance. Payment upon delivery. Cal ripped the manifest free. He grabbed a sack of flour that had the government seal clearly branded on the burlap. Proof. He jumped down. "Get out of here," he told the driver. "Turn around. If I see you in this canyon again, I burn the wagon." The driver didn't argue. He whipped the mules, turning the team in a tight, panicked circle. Cal walked back to his horse. He handed the manifest to Nayeli. "We got him," he said. They took shelter in a shallow cave high in the rocks to let the storm pass. The wind outside was deafening, a roaring ocean of air. Inside, it was quiet, cold, and intimate. Cal built a small fire using dried mesquite roots. The flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Nayeli sat near the fire, holding the manifest. She looked at Cal. He was leaning against the wall, eyes closed, his face pale and battered. "You are hurt bad," she said. "I've had worse," Cal murmured. Nayeli moved to him. She knelt beside him. She reached out and touched the bandage on his ribs. "Let me see. It's fine. Nayeli, let me see." Cal opened his eyes. He looked at her. He nodded. She unbuttoned his shirt. The skin beneath was purple and black, the ribs clearly bruised, perhaps cracked. She touched the skin gently, her fingers cool. Cal sucked in a breath. "Does it hurt?" "Everything hurts," Cal whispered. He wasn't talking about the ribs. Nayeli looked up into his face. They were inches apart. The smell of sage and sweat and old blood was heavy in the air. "Why do you do this?" she asked. Her voice was trembling. "You lose your name. You lose your blood." "For what?" "For you," Cal said. The truth hung there, naked and terrifying. Cal reached out and took her hand. His grip was strong, desperate. "I'm afraid." "Nayeli," he said. "Of Gojo? No, I'm afraid of wanting you, because wanting you makes me reckless. It makes me think I can fight the whole world, and I know I can't." Nayeli looked at their joined hands. Her own heart was beating so hard she thought it would bruise her chest. "I am terrified too," she whispered. "I am terrified that this hope is just another trap. That you will die, and I will be left alone in the dark." "We are already in the dark," Cal said. He leaned forward. He did not kiss her. He pressed his forehead against hers. It was a gesture of exhaustion and profound intimacy. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her hair, the smoke, the wind. Nayeli froze for a second. Then she melted. She brought her hands up and cupped his battered face. She held him like he was something precious and fragile. They stayed like that for a long time, the fire crackling, the wind screaming outside. It was not a sexual union. It was something deeper. It was two drowning people finding a piece of driftwood large enough for both of them. "You are not alone," Nayeli whispered against his skin. "Not anymore." Cal pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were wet. "Then we finish this," he said. "We drag the truth out into the daylight, even if the daylight kills us." "Yes," Nayeli said, "even if it kills us." High on the opposite ridge, hidden in the darkness where the firelight could not reach, Gojo lowered his field glasses. He had watched the wagon stop. He had watched the two riders. He had watched them ride together into the rocks. He did not need to see inside the cave. He knew. The wind whipped his hair, but he did not feel the cold. He felt only a burning, cold hatred that was clearer and sharper than anything he had ever known. The rancher thinks he has bought a wife. Gojo said to the darkness. He jacked around into the chamber of his rifle. The metallic clack-clack was swallowed by the wind. Tomorrow, Gojo said, he will find that he's only bought a grave. December brought the iron-gray skies that signaled the coming of snow in the high country. The air in San Solano grew heavy, not with moisture, but with the suffocating pressure of a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. Rumors flew faster than telegraph sparks. Men whispered in the saloons that the 6th Cavalry was marching south from Fort Apache, their guidons snapping in the wind, coming to wipe the Chiricahua from the face of the earth. At the general store, the barrel of flour sat untouched, but the crate of Winchester ammunition was empty by noon. Farmers who had once traded squash with the Apache women now barred their doors and slept with shotguns across their laps. Cal Hart walked out of the county courthouse, his boots echoing on the boardwalk. He felt a profound, hollow exhaustion in his chest, a weight heavier than the cracked ribs that still throbbed with every breath. He had spent 2 hours in the office of Judge Thaddeus Thornton. He had laid the manifest on the mahogany desk. He had shown the judge the government seal, the forged signatures, the clear trail of theft that led from the Indian agency straight to the pockets of Cyrus Vance. The judge, a man with a face like a bulldog and eyes that saw only political expediency, had barely glanced at them. These are serious accusations. Hart, the judge had said, packing his pipe with slow, deliberate fingers. But this is federal property. Jurisdiction falls to the territorial governor or the bureau in Washington. My court handles cattle theft and drunkards, not treason. It is theft, Cal had argued, his voice tight. They are stealing rations. They are starving a people to force a war. And you are a rancher. Not a lawyer, the judge had countered. These papers could be forgeries. You admit you stole them from a freight wagon? That makes you a highwayman. Mr. Hart, I suggest you go back to your ranch and let the law handle the law. Cal stopped on the street corner. The wind bit through his coat. He looked at the sheriff's office across the square. Sheriff Miller was standing in the window. Watching him, Miller looked away, ashamed. The law was not broken. It was bought. Cal realized then that there was no gavel coming to save them. There was no cavalry riding to the rescue. The cavalry was the hammer being swung by the very men committing the crime. He mounted his horse, the movement sending a spike of pain through his side. He turned the animal not toward home, but toward the jagged line of the dragoons. In the canyon, the mood was one of grim finality. The Apache families were dismantling their summer wickiups. Women were packing dried meat into parfleches. They were preparing to move deeper into the mountains, into the stronghold, a place of rock and ice where an army could not follow, but where hunger would be a constant companion. Nayeli stood by the fire, wrapping a blanket around a bundle of herbs. She felt eyes on her back. Gojo stood at the entrance of the lodge. He was not shouting. He was not striking her. He was standing with a stillness that was far more terrifying. He walked to the fire and kicked a log back into the flames. Sparks flew upward, dying in the cold air. "You smell of him," Gojo said. Nayeli did not look up. "I smell of horse and smoke. You smell of the white man's lies." Gojo said. His voice was low, a rumble in the throat. "The people talk. They say you meet him in the rocks. They say you plot with him." "I plot for food," Nayeli said, keeping her voice steady. "I plot for the truth." Gojo crouched down. He grabbed her wrist. He did not squeeze hard enough to break bone, but hard enough to remind her that he could. "You are my wife," he said. "You are not a warrior. You are not a chief. You belong to this fire, to this bed." "I belong to myself," Nayeli whispered. Gojo smiled. It was a cold, joyless expression. "If you run to him," Gojo said, "I will not chase you. I will tell the people that you sold our location to the soldiers. I will tell them that every child who dies this winter died because Nayeli opened the gate. You will be a ghost to us, a traitor. Your name will be spoken only to curse it." He released her wrist. "And the rancher," Gojo added, standing up, "when the soldiers come, he will be safe in his house. He will drink his coffee and forget you." Because that is what white men do. They use and they discard. He turned and walked away into the gathering dark. Nayeli sat frozen. The threat went deeper than violence. To be an outcast. To be the reason for her people's destruction. It was a weight she did not know if she could bear. But she looked at the fire. She remembered Cal's face in the cave. She remembered the way he had touched her ribs. Not to possess, but to heal. He is wrong, she thought. But the doubt was a splinter in her heart. Later that night, a shadow moved at the edge of the camp. Nayeli slipped away, moving silent as smoke through the brush. She met Cal in a dry wash a mile from the sentries. He looked worse than before. The bruising on his face had turned a sickly yellow-green. He looked like a man holding onto sanity by his fingernails. "The judge did nothing," Cal said immediately. "He didn't even offer a greeting. They are protected. Nayeli, the corruption goes to the capital." Nayeli nodded. She had expected this. "And Gozo prepares to move the band. We go to the high rocks in 2 days. If you go there, you starve," Cal said. "Or the army starves you out in the spring." He stepped closer. He took off his hat, running a hand through his dusty hair. "I can get you out," he said. Nayeli looked at him. "Out? I have money buried at the ranch, enough for passage to Mexico, or California. I can take you. Tonight, we can ride south, cross the border before dawn." He was offering her a life without hunger, a life without Gojo. "And my people?" she asked. Cal looked at the ground. "I cannot save everyone. Nayeli, I tried, I failed, but I can save you." Nayeli looked at the moon, hanging sharp and white over the desert. She thought of the insults. She thought of the hunger. She thought of Gozo's threat. "If I leave," she said, "I prove Gozo right. I become the traitor he says I am." She looked back at Cal. "I cannot run. Cal, not while the lie still stands." Cal looked up. His eyes were full of pain, but also a dawning realization. He nodded slowly. "I will not decide for you," he said. "I will not be another man telling you where to stand. If you want to fight, we fight." "But how?" Nayeli asked. "The judge is deaf. The sheriff is afraid. We make them hear," Cal said. "We stop whispering. We scream." He outlined the plan. There was a town meeting scheduled for Sunday, a revival gathering with a traveling preacher, a man named Reverend Solaris, who was known for his fiery independence. Traders would be there, the freight drivers, neutral eyes. "We bring the proof there," Cal said. "We stand up in front of God and everyone. We read the ledger. We show the manifest. We force the town to look at the theft." "It is dangerous," Nayeli said. "It is suicide," Cal corrected. "But it is the only card we have left to play." A rustle in the brush made them both turn. Cal's hand went to his gun. "Do not shoot," a voice rasped. An old woman stepped out of the mesquite. It was Guyen, the grandmother of the boy who had been murdered. She was small, withered like a dried apple, but her eyes were bright and hard. Behind her stood Taza, a sub-chief who had often argued for caution against Gojo's rage. "We followed you," Taza said. Cal did not lower his hand, but he did not draw. "You heard?" Cal asked. "We heard." Guyen said. She walked up to Nayeli and took her hand. "Gojo says you are a traitor. He says you sell us for horses." She looked at Cal, studying his battered face. "But a traitor does not weep for the dead," Guyen said. "And a white man does not take a beating for a basket weaver unless his heart has changed." She turned to Taza. "The white man speaks truth." Guyen said, "The war is a trick." Taza nodded slowly. He looked at Cal with a measuring gaze. "If you go to this meeting," Taza said, "Gojo will try to kill you. The agent will try to kill you." "I know," Cal said. "Then do not go alone." Taza said, "When you stand to speak, look to the hills. We will be watching. If the truth is spoken, we will hold our fire. If you lie, if I lie, you can put a bullet in me yourself," Cal said. Taza grunted. A fair trade? The plan was set, but the enemy did not wait for Sunday. The next morning, Cal was at his ranch, packing saddlebags with the last of his supplies. He was cleaning his Winchester when Luis burst into the house. The old foreman was pale, his breath coming in gasps. "You have to go," Louise said. "Now." "What is it?" Cal asked. Standing up, "The sheriff is coming. With a posse. And 2 marshals from Tucson." "For what?" "Murder," Louise said. "They found a body in the alley behind the saloon this morning. It was Higgins, the clerk." Cal felt the blood drain from his face. Higgins. The man who had given him the first ledger. "He was shot with a .45, Louise said. "And they found your kerchief in his pocket, the one with your brand stitched on it. It was a frame-up, crude, simple, and effective." "Get the fresh horses," Cal said. "It is too late for horses," Louise said. "They are at the gate." Cal grabbed his rifle. He looked at the back door. "Go, Patron," Louise said. "I will talk to them. I will buy you 5 minutes. Louise, go!" Cal ran. He burst out the back door, sprinting low through the dry cornfield. He heard the shouts from the front yard. He heard Sheriff Miller's voice, amplified by fear. "Cal Hart, come out with your hands up." Cal reached the creek bed, which was dry and choked with tamarisk. He scrambled down the bank, his boots sliding on the loose stones. He didn't stop. He ran until his lungs burned, until the ranch house was just a speck in the distance. He was a fugitive now. The law was no longer an obstacle. It was a weapon pointed at his chest. He had to get to Nayeli. They couldn't wait for Sunday. They had to move now. He found her at the spring. She saw him coming on foot, stumbling, covered in dust. She knew instantly. "They are coming," Cal gasped, falling to his knees by the water. Nayeli didn't ask questions. She grabbed the reins of her mare. She pulled Cal up. "Get on behind me," she said. They rode double until they were deep in the Badlands, a landscape of twisted rock and cactus that looked like the surface of the moon. That night, the cold was a physical assault. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees. They had no fire. To light a fire was to invite a bullet. They found shelter in a shallow depression beneath a shelf of sandstone. Cal was shivering uncontrollably. The shock of the run, combined with his injuries and the biting cold, was shutting his body down. Nayeli took charge. She was in her element now. The rancher knew cattle and fences. She knew survival. She cleared the ground of sharp stones. She cut armfuls of sagebrush to create an insulating layer against the frozen earth. She forced Cal to drink the last of the water. "You are freezing," she said. "I'm fine," Cal chattered, his teeth clicking together. "You are a liar," Nayeli said gently. She lay down on the sagebrush and pulled him down beside her. She opened her heavy serape and wrapped it around both of them. Cal stiffened. This was a boundary they had danced around but never crossed. "Be still," Nayeli commanded. "This is not romance. This is heat." She pressed her body against his back, wrapping her arms around his chest. She could feel the tremors running through him. She could feel the rigid tape binding his ribs. Slowly, the warmth began to bleed from her into him. The shivering subsided. Cal turned in her arms, shifting so he was facing her. The darkness was absolute, save for the brilliant, icy wash of the stars above the canyon rim. He could not see her face clearly, but he could feel her breath on his cheek. "They took everything," Cal whispered. "My land, my name, now my freedom. They cannot take what you know," Nayeli said. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the roughness of his stubble. "You are a strange man, Cal Hart," she said softly. "You fight for people who would kill you." "I fight for you," Cal said. The confession hung in the cold air. Nayeli moved closer. The barrier between them, the wall of race, of history, of marriage, seemed to dissolve in the freezing dark. There was only the heat of 2 bodies trying to stay alive. She kissed him. It was not a tentative kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and fear and an overwhelming, aching need. Cal made a low sound in his throat and pulled her closer, burying his hands in her hair. For a moment, the war didn't exist. The posse didn't exist. There was only the sensation of her mouth, the solid weight of her against him, the fierce affirmation that they were still alive. Nayeli pulled back, breathless. "We are alive," she whispered. Cal rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. The words terrified him more than the lynch mob. "I know," Nayeli said, "and that is why we must win." Morning brought a gray, bleak dawn and the sound of distant gunfire. The posse was tracking them. "We need the last piece," Cal said, checking his revolver. He had 6 rounds left. "We have the ledger. We have the manifest. But we need the order. The paper that connects Vance to the agent directly." "I know where it is," Nayeli said. Cal looked at her. "How?" "Chayton," she said. "The boy they killed. Before he died. He told his grandmother he saw the agent hiding a box, not at the agency, but at the old stagecoach station near the river crossing. The one that burned down last year. It's a long shot," Cal said. "It is the only shot," Nayeli said. "They moved like ghosts. Nayeli taught him how to step, toe first, then heel, rolling the weight to avoid snapping twigs. She taught him to freeze when the wind died, to move only when the brush was rustling. They reached the burnt-out stage station by midday. It was a ruin of blackened timber and adobe melting back into the earth. Cal crept into the remains of the main room. Nayeli watched the ridge. He dug through the ash and debris in the corner where the chimney had collapsed. His fingers scraped against stone. He found a loose flagstone. He pried it up. Beneath it was a metal strongbox. Cal shot the lock off. The sound was deafening in the silence. He opened it. Inside were stacks of greenbacks, thousands of dollars in bribe money, and a letter. It was on the stationery of the Cyrus Vance Cattle Company. "Silas," it read, "the unexpected arrival of the 6th Cavalry is our opportunity. Create an incident. Make sure the blame falls on the hostiles. I need the valley cleared by January. Authorization for the raids is enclosed. C.V." Cal held the paper up. His hands were shaking. "We have them," he said. A bullet struck the adobe wall 6 inches from his head. Dust exploded into his eyes. "They are here!" Nayeli screamed. Cal scrambled back, shoving the letter into his coat. He looked out the window. On the ridge to the north, a line of riders had appeared. The sun glinted on badges. On the ridge to the south, blue uniforms appeared. The cavalry. They were pinched. "The troops are here," Cal said. He looked at Nayeli. "They think they are catching an Apache war party. They will kill us," Nayeli said. "Not if we make it to the town," Cal said. The town was 5 miles away. Between them and the town was open ground. "We can't outrun them," Nayeli said. "No," Cal said. He looked at the horses. "We can't run." He turned to her. He grabbed her shoulders. "We walk," he said. "Walk?" "We walk straight down the road. We hold the papers up. If we run, we are prey. If we walk, we are witnesses." It was madness. It was the only choice left. Nayeli looked at the riders closing in. She looked at Cal. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw the iron resolve. "Then we walk," she said. They stepped out of the ruins of the station. They did not mount their horses. They slapped the animals on the rump, sending them galloping off into the brush to draw fire. Cal took Nayeli's hand. He held the letter in his other hand, high in the air. They began to walk down the center of the dusty road. 2 small figures against the massive, indifferent landscape. Behind them, the posse shouted and spurred their horses. Ahead of them, the cavalry bugle sounded. Cal looked at Nayeli. "Don't look back," he said. "Just keep walking." Nayeli squeezed his hand. Her grip was strong enough to crush bone. "I am here," she said. And together, they walked into the guns. The San Solano town square was not a place of civic beauty. It was a patch of beaten earth where the ambitions of men came to die in the heat. On this Sunday, it had been transformed into a theater of judgment, the traveling revival tent, a canvas cathedral stained with road dust, flapped in the wind. Reverend Solaris, a man with a voice like a grinding millstone, stood on a crate, preaching about the fires of hell. But the real fire was in the crowd. 300 people were packed into the square. Ranchers, miners, shopkeepers, and the drifters who smelled blood in the water. They were there for the spectacle, for the promise of scandal that had been whispered from the saloons to the church pews. Agent Silas Reed stood near the livery stable entrance, flanked by 4 men who wore badges that shone too brightly to be real. He looked confident, smoothing his silk vest, checking his pocket watch. He was a man who believed that money could buy gravity itself. Then the road to the north cleared. The silence started at the edge of the crowd and rolled inward like a wave. The hymn-singing died in throats. Heads turned. Calhart and Nayeli walked down the center of the main street. They did not run. They did not hide. They walked side by side, a white man battered and bruised, limping slightly, and an Apache woman with a spine of steel, wearing a serape that was dusty from the Badlands. They looked like ghosts who had clawed their way out of a shallow grave. Behind them, the posse from the sheriff's office had stopped, confused by the sheer audacity of the approach. Ahead, the cavalry patrol that had been signaled by the gunfire reined in their mounts, the lieutenant unsure of his orders in the face of such a public procession. Cal walked straight to the center of the square, right in front of the revival crate. He stopped. He looked at the crowd. His left eye was swollen shut, his lip split, his coat hanging off his frame like a shroud. But his good eye burned with a cold, terrifying light. He held up the papers. Silas Reed pushed through the crowd, his face twisting into a mask of righteous indignation. "Arrest him!" Reed shouted, pointing a manicured finger. "Arrest that man for treason. He's consorting with the enemy. He's bringing a savage into our midst." The sheriff, Miller, stepped forward, his hand on his gun, but he looked uncertain. He looked at Cal's face, then at Reed's. Cal did not speak to the sheriff. He spoke to the crowd. "I'm not here to hide," Cal said. His voice was raspy, dry as old parchment, but it carried, "I'm here to show you what you bought with your tax dollars." "He loves the squaw," Reed yelled, trying to drown him out. "Look at them. It is an abomination. He bought her for horses. He sold his own race for a night in a blanket." The crowd murmured. The words were ugly, designed to hook into the darkest parts of their prejudice. Men spat on the ground. A woman covered her child's eyes. Nayeli stepped forward. She did not look down. She did not look at Cal. She looked straight at Silas Reed. "You speak of buying," Nayeli said. Her voice was clear, melodic, and utterly fearless. It cut through the murmuring like a knife through canvas. "You speak of trade," she continued, "but you are the merchant. Agent Reed." She turned to the crowd. She saw the hate in their eyes, the disgust. She did not flinch from it. She walked toward the women in the front row. "You call me a savage," Nayeli said. "You call me a whore. You say this man bought me." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "He offered horses. Yes," she said. "He made a spectacle. He made you all look. He made you whisper. He made you hate him." "Why?" She held up the ledger page she had taken from the strongbox. "Because it was the only way to make you listen," she said. "If I came to you as a mother begging for food for my starving child, you would have slammed the door. If he came to you as a neighbor speaking of theft, you would have called him a liar." She walked back to Cal and took the manifest from his hand. "So we gave you a scandal," Nayeli said. "We gave you a story about a man and a woman because that is all you understand. But the real story is this." She slapped the papers against the wood of the preacher's crate. 3,000 head of cattle, paid for by the government, stolen by this man and Cyrus Vance. 500 rifles, meant for the reservation police, sold to smugglers. Starvation used as a weapon to make my husband go to war so that you— She pointed to the crowd, "so that you would be frightened enough to call the soldiers. So that the soldiers would buy beef from Vance." "It is a lie," Reed screamed. His composure was cracking. The veins in his neck bulged. "She is a lying savage. She is trying to save her skin." "Is she?" The voice came from the back of the crowd. A man stepped down from a freight wagon. It was the driver Cal and Nayeli had stopped in the pass. He was a rough man, a drinker, a man who didn't care much for Indians, but he took off his hat and twisted it in his hands. "I drive for Vance," the teamster said. "I drove the wagon last night. It was marked for flour. But it was empty, just like Hart said. And I seen the agent there when we loaded up. I seen him take the cash box. The crowd shifted. The mood changed from hostility to confusion, and then to a low, dangerous growl. Reed looked around. He saw the doubt. He saw the sheriff's hand move away from his gun. "You are all fools," Reed hissed. He backed away, his hand going inside his coat. "Evidence," Cal shouted, throwing the letter from the strongbox onto the ground. "Signed by Vance, ordering the raids." The sheriff stooped and picked up the paper. He read it. His face went pale. He looked up at Reed. "Silas, you're under arrest." Reed didn't surrender. He panicked. "Kill them!" Reed shrieked to his bodyguards. "They are armed. Kill them." One of the hired guns, a man with dead eyes and a hair trigger, didn't hesitate. He saw Cal's hand move and he drew. The crack of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed square. Cal threw himself to the side, tackling Nayeli. The bullet missed Cal. It struck a woman standing behind him, the wife of the town baker. She collapsed with a look of total surprise, clutching her chest. The square exploded. Screams tore the air. Horses reared, trampling the revival benches. The sheriff fired back, hitting the gunman. The crowd became a panicked stampede. People running, falling, crawling over each other to escape the crossfire. Cal rolled, coming up with his revolver in his hand. "Stay down," he yelled to Nayeli. Smoke filled the air, acrid and gray. Through the haze, Cal saw Reed running toward the alley where his horse was tied. Cal raised his gun, but a shadow blocked his view. A horse had jumped the fence of the corral and was charging through the crowd. The rider was screaming a war cry that chilled the blood. It was Gozo. He had ridden down from the hills, using the chaos as his cover. He was not looking at the agent. He was not looking at the soldiers. His eyes were locked on Cal Hart. He was painted for death, white ash on his face, black streaks under his eyes. He held a lance in one hand and a heavy Colt revolver in the other. He rode straight for Cal, ignoring the bullets whizzing past him from the deputies. Cal scrambled backward, tripping over a broken bench. "Hart!" Gozo roared. "Thief of wives!" He fired. The bullet kicked dirt into Cal's face. Cal scrambled to his feet. He didn't want this. He had the proof. He had the law turning. He didn't want to kill the husband. "Gozo, no!" Cal shouted. "It's over. The agent is done." Gozo didn't care about the agent. He spurred his horse, driving the animal's chest into Cal, knocking him down again. The horse's hooves flashed inches from Cal's skull. Gozo leaped from the saddle. He landed on Cal like a mountain lion. They rolled in the dirt, a tangle of limbs and rage. Gozo was stronger, fueled by a lifetime of war and the bitter poison of humiliation. He dropped his gun and went for his knife, a heavy butcher blade that glinted in the sun. "I take your heart," Gozo screamed, pinning Cal's arm with his knee. "I take it to the dogs." Cal struggled, gasping for air. His cracked ribs were screaming. He caught Gozo's wrist, holding the blade inches from his throat. "Nayeli!" Cal gasped. He saw her through the dust. She was standing 10 feet away. She had picked up a dropped shotgun. She had it leveled at them, but she couldn't shoot. They were too close. Gozo saw her too. He laughed, a wet, choking sound. "Watch, woman! Watch him die!" He put all his weight on the knife. The blade tip touched Cal's skin. A line of blood appeared on Cal's throat. Cal looked into Gozo's eyes. He saw no mercy. He saw a man who would rather burn the world down than live in it with shame. Cal freed his right hand. He couldn't reach his own gun, but Gozo's revolver was lying in the dirt next to his head. Cal let go of the knife wrist with one hand and grabbed the heavy Colt. He jammed the barrel into Gozo's side, right below the ribs. "Don't make me," Cal gritted out. Gozo lunged, driving the knife down. Cal pulled the trigger. The boom was muffled by Gozo's body. The impact lifted the Apache leader off Cal. Gozo froze. The knife slipped from his fingers. He looked down at his stomach, then at Cal. He did not look afraid. He looked surprised. He rolled off Cal, collapsing onto his back in the dirt. The chaos around them seemed to recede, the sounds of the town fading into a dull roar. Cal scrambled up, coughing, clutching his throat where the knife had cut him. He looked down at the dying man. Nayeli dropped the shotgun. She walked to her husband. She knelt in the bloody dust. Gojo's eyes focused on her. His breath was coming in wet rattles. "You," Gojo whispered, "you are mine." "No," Nayeli said softly. She reached out and closed his eyes even before the light left them. "I was never yours. Gojo, I was just the shadow you cast." He shuddered once, and then he was gone. Cal stood there, swaying. He felt sick. He had killed the man he had wronged. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like another stain on a soul that was already dark. He looked at Nayeli. She was staring at the body. Her face was unreadable. Not happy, not sad, but hollowed out by the complexity of a grief that had no name. She had hated him. Yes, but he had been the shield of her people for 20 years. "Reed!" The shout came from Sheriff Miller. "He's getting away!" Cal snapped his head up. Through the settling dust, he saw Silas Reed galloping out of the alley on a black mare, heading north toward the river crossing. Cal looked at Nayeli. She stood up. She wiped her hands on her skirt. "Finish it," she said. Cal grabbed the reins of Gojo's war pony, which was standing nearby. Trembling, he swung into the saddle. The stirrups were too short, the saddle strange, but the horse was fast. He spurred the animal. "I'm coming with you," Nayeli shouted. She grabbed the horse of the dead gunman and vaulted on. They rode out of the square, leaving the dead baker's wife, the dead chief, and the stunned town behind them. The chase was a blur of wind and grit. Reed was riding a thoroughbred, fast on the flat, but Cal and Nayeli were riding with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. They pushed the horses hard across the scrubland, the hooves kicking up clouds of alkali. Reed was heading for the Skeleton Canyon crossing. If he made it across the river, he could lose himself in the Badlands, maybe make it to a railhead, maybe disappear with his stolen money. They reached the canyon entrance as the sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the rock. Reed's horse was blowing hard. He whipped it mercilessly. Cal cut across a switchback, risking the horse's legs on the loose shale. He gained ground. Reed looked back. His face was a pale oval of terror. He fired a wild shot over his shoulder. Cal didn't return fire. He rode. They hit the riverbank. The water was low but fast, churning around black rocks. Reed forced his horse into the water. The animal stumbled. Reed fell, splashing into the icy current. He scrambled up, clutching his saddlebags, dragging himself toward the far bank. Cal pulled his horse to a sliding stop. He jumped down. Nayeli reined in beside him. Reed was crawling up the muddy bank on the other side. He was wet, shivering, pathetic. "Stop!" Cal yelled. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. Reed turned. He pulled a second gun, a small derringer, from his boot. "You can't touch me," Reed screamed. "I have friends. I have money. I will buy the judge. I will buy the governor. You are nobody. Hart, you are dirt." He raised the gun. Cal stood on the bank. He raised his heavy Winchester rifle. He didn't aim for the leg. He didn't aim to wound. He remembered the starving children. He remembered the boy Chayton, scalped for a headline. He remembered the baker's wife in the dust. The system would let Reed go. A lawyer would find a loophole. A bribe would find a pocket. There was no court here. There was only the river and the wind. Reed fired. The small bullet hit the water 5 feet in front of Cal. Cal took a breath. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his bruised shoulder. The bullet caught Silas Reed in the center of his chest. It knocked him backward as if he had been kicked by a mule. He slammed into the mud, slid down the bank, and came to rest with his boots in the water. The saddlebags fell open. Greenback dollars spilled out, floating away on the current, dissolving like wet leaves. Cal lowered the rifle. The ringing in his ears was loud, a high-pitched whine that wouldn't stop. It was over. He sat down heavily on a driftwood log. He put his head in his hands. He shook. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him hollowed out and trembling. Nayeli walked to the water's edge. She watched the money float away. She watched the body of the man who had tried to erase her people. She did not cheer. She did not smile. She walked back to Cal and sat beside him. She did not touch him at first. She just sat, letting her presence be the anchor. "He is dead," she said. Cal nodded into his hands. "And Gajo is dead. And the woman in the square. And the truth is out," Nayeli said. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. "Look at me. Cal." Cal raised his head. His face was a map of violence. Bruises, cuts, blood that wasn't his. "We did not choose the war," Nayeli said. "We only chose how to fight it." Cal looked at the river. "Is it enough?" he asked. "Will it stop them?" "For now," Nayeli said. "The army will see the proof. The newspapers will print the ledger. Vance will hide in his mansion, but he will not get his war this winter. The children will eat." She looked toward the mountains where her people were hiding. "But another agent will come," she said softly. "And another rancher will want the water." "I know," Cal said. He looked at her. Really looked at her. "And what about us?" he asked. Nayeli looked down at their joined hands. The red dirt of the riverbank was stained into their skin. "We are not the same people who met at the parley," she said. "I am not a wife. You are not a rancher with a clean name. We are something else now. What are we?" "Survivors," Nayeli said. She stood up. She offered him her hand. "Come. We cannot stay here. The soldiers will come for the body." Cal took her hand. He stood up, groaning as his ribs protested. He felt old. He felt like he had lived 10 lifetimes in 1 week. He looked at the dead man one last time, then turned his back on him. They walked to the horses. The sun was gone now. The canyon was filling with blue shadow. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, smelling of snow. They mounted up. "Where to?" Cal asked. Nayeli pointed not toward the town, and not toward the reservation. She pointed west, toward the deep mountains where the lines on the maps grew fuzzy and indistinct. "Away," she said, "until the noise stops." They rode out of the canyon as the first flakes of snow began to fall, dusting the red rocks with white. They rode side by side, close enough that their stirrups touched. They did not speak. There were no words left that could carry the weight of what they had done. There was only the sound of the horses, the wind, and the beating of 2 hearts that had managed, against all odds, to keep beating. The snow that had fallen during the night did not last. The Arizona earth was too hot, the memory of the sun too deep in the stone, and by noon the white dusting had vanished into mud and steam. The land returned to what it had always been, brown, gray, and indifferent. It was the kind of quiet that follows a gunshot, a ringing silence where the world seems to hold its breath, waiting to see who is left standing. Cal Hart rode back to the Broken Spur alone. The adrenaline of the river chase had drained away, leaving him hollowed out, his ribs throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache. He passed the spot where the fence line had been cut weeks ago. It was still unrepaired, the wire curling like rusted snakes in the grass. When he rode into the yard, Luis was waiting on the porch. The old vaquero was cleaning a rifle, the motion steady and calm. He watched Cal dismount, watched him loosen the cinch, watched him walk stiffly to the water trough. "They say the agent is dead," Luis said. He did not ask. He stated it as a fact that the wind had carried. "He is dead," Cal said. He splashed water on his face, washing away the dried mud and the shadow of the canyon. "And the woman?" Luis asked. "She is with her people." Luis nodded, satisfied. He set the rifle down. "You have visitors. Patron." Cal looked up. 2 men were sitting on horses near the barn. He recognized them. They were neighbors, men he had branded cattle with, men he had loaned tools to in lean years. One was named Garrett. He was a big man with a face like a slab of beef. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Cal's boot. "We heard what happened in town," Garrett said. His voice was thick with disgust. "We heard you killed Gajo, and we heard you stood up for the savages against a white man. I stood up for the law," Cal said. "Reed was a thief. Reed was a white man," Garrett said, "and you took the side of a squaw against him. You brought shame on this valley." "Hart," "We don't want you here," the second man said. He kept his hand near his holster. "A man who lays with Apache trash ain't welcome at the table." Cal looked at them. He felt a terrible weariness. These were the men whose cattle he had helped pull from bog holes. These were the men whose children he had watched grow up. "Get off my land," Cal said quietly. Garrett sneered. "It won't be your land for long. The bank will hear about this. The association will hear about this. You're a dead man walking. Hart, you just don't know it yet." They turned their horses and rode out, kicking up dust that drifted over Cal, coating him in a fine, gray layer of rejection. Cal watched them go. He realized then that the bullet he had put in Silas Reed hadn't killed the corruption. It had only killed the man. The hate remained. It was in the soil now, deeper than the roots of the mesquite, high in the Dragoon Mountains. The air was thin and cold. The Apache band had moved to the winter stronghold, a natural fortress of granite spires and hidden springs. Naeli sat by the fire in the council circle. It was a place usually reserved for warriors and elders. But today, no one told her to leave. The news of the ledger had spread. The young men knew now that the starvation had been a trick. They knew that Gozo had been played for a fool by the agent, and that his pride had nearly led them into a massacre. But gratitude is a complicated thing when it is mixed with shame. Some of the women looked at Naeli with eyes that were hard and judging. They saw a woman who had ridden with a white man, who had slept in his cabin, who had been the cause of their chief's death. They whispered behind their hands about her virtue. But others, the mothers who were boiling the meat from the cattle Cal's horses had bought, looked at her with a quiet, fierce respect. Taza, the sub-chief who was now leading the band, stood up. He was a pragmatic man, less consumed by fire than Gozo had been. "The soldiers have stopped at the river," Taza said. "They found the agent's body. They found the money. They have returned to the fort. There will be no attack this winter." A murmur went around the circle. It was a reprieve, a breath of air for a drowning people. "This woman," Taza said, pointing to Naeli, "brought us the truth. She walked into the white man's town. She stood before their guns. She is unclean." A young warrior shouted from the back. "She rode with the rancher. She is his woman now." Taza turned his head slowly. The warrior fell silent. "She is the reason your belly is full," Taza said. "If she is unclean, then so is the food you eat." He turned back to Naeli. "You have a heavy name now. Naeli. Some will hate you for it, but you have a voice. Use it." Naeli stood up. She felt the weight of their eyes, hundreds of dark, intense gazes. She felt the ghost of Gozo standing at her shoulder, whispering that she was nothing but property. She pushed the ghost away. "I did not do this for the white man," she said. Her voice was steady, carrying to the edge of the circle. "And I did not do it for Gozo. I did it for the children who are not here to speak." She looked at the young warrior who had shouted. "You speak of honor," she said. "Honor is not dying in a foolish war. Honor is living long enough to teach your sons who their enemy really is." She sat down. The silence that followed was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of a shift in power. She was no longer just a wife. She was a force. She had walked through the fire and come out carrying the coals. 2 weeks passed. The winter deepened, bringing frost that coated the cactus in silver needles. Cal worked the ranch with a grim determination. He repaired the fences that had been cut. He cleaned the wells. But the isolation was absolute. The general store in San Solano refused his credit. The blacksmith claimed he was too busy to shoe Cal's horses. He was a pariah, and he was lonely with an ache that was sharper than the cold. He rode out to the line shack every evening, sitting in the dark, smoking cigarettes, watching the ridge. He didn't know if she would come. He didn't know if she could come. On the 15th night, she was there. She emerged from the shadows of the pines like a spirit, wrapped in her serape, her horse moving silently on the pine needles. Cal stood up from the porch step. He tossed his cigarette away. "You came," he said. "I had to wait until the moon was dark." Naeli said, "Taza watches me. He thinks I will run." Cal walked down the steps. He stopped 3 feet from her. He wanted to cross the distance. He wanted to pull her into him and never let go. But the reality of their world stood between them like a wall of glass. "Are you safe?" he asked. "I am fed," Naomi said. "I am heard. But I am not at peace." "And you?" she asked, looking at the dark ranch house behind him. "I am a ghost in my own home," Cal said. "The town hates me. The bank is calling the loan on the 1st of the month. They are going to take it. Naomi. All of it." Naomi looked at him. She saw the lines of fatigue etched into his face. He looked older than he had in the canyon. The fight had taken something vital from him. "They punish you for the truth," she said. "They punish me for choosing you," Cal corrected. He reached out then, unable to stop himself. He took her hand. It was ungloved, cold from the ride. "I don't care about the land," Cal said. "I thought I did. I thought this ranch was who I was. But it's just dirt. It's just grass that dies in the winter." "What do you care about?" Naomi asked softly. "I care that I wake up every morning and the first thing I look for is the horizon. Wondering if you are there," Cal said. "I care that when I close my eyes, I hear your voice saving my life in that square." Naomi squeezed his hand. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I look for you too," she whispered. "In the smoke of the fire, in the wind. You are a sickness in my blood." Cal Hart. It was not a poetic declaration. It was an admission of a difficult, dangerous truth. To love each other was to invite destruction. "What do we do?" Cal asked. Naomi looked at the mountains. "I cannot stay in the camp," she said. "I am a reminder of what they want to forget. And you cannot stay here. They will burn you out." "Cal, if not the bank, then the neighbors. Then we leave," Cal said. It was a terrifying simplicity. "Leave?" Naomi asked. "To where?" "South," Cal said. "Mexico. The Sierra Madre. There are valleys there where the law is what you make it, where no one knows the names Cyrus Vance or Gojo. It is a hard land," Naomi said. "We are hard people," Cal said. He pulled her closer. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. For a moment, they just held each other, breathing in the scent of dust and leather and survival. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled embrace of the fugitive run. It was a slow, deep settling. It was the feeling of a key finally finding its lock. "I'm afraid," Naomi whispered into his coat. "Good," Cal said. "Fear keeps you awake." He pulled back and looked at her. "Come with me," he said. "Not as a purchase, not as a deal. Come with me because you choose it." Naomi looked at his battered face. She saw the man who had destroyed his own life to save a child he didn't know. She saw the man who had looked at her across a parley ground and begged for help. "I choose it," she said. The final injustice arrived in the form of a carriage with polished black wheels. 2 days before the bank foreclosure, a man arrived at the Broken Spur. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than Cal's herd. He introduced himself as Mr. Sterling, an attorney representing the Cyrus Vance Cattle Company. He did not get down from the carriage. He spoke to Cal across the fence rail. "Mr. Vance is a pragmatic man," Sterling said, adjusting his spectacles. "He recognizes that Agent Reed was overzealous. Mistakes were made. Crimes were committed," Cal said, leaning on a fence post. "Semantics," Sterling said with a thin smile. "The point is, Mr. Hart, the situation has become embarrassing for everyone. The trial, the hearings, they are disruptive to business." "What do you want?" Cal asked. "Mr. Vance is prepared to offer you a solution. He will pay off your note at the bank. He will add a generous sum for your trouble. You will keep your ranch. You will keep your cattle." Cal narrowed his eyes. "And in return?" "In return, you will sign a statement," Sterling said, pulling a paper from his breast pocket. "A statement recanting your testimony. You will say that the Apache woman tricked you, that she manipulated you into attacking a federal agent. You will denounce her, publicly, as a liar and a seductress." Cal looked at the paper. It was a ticket to safety. It was his ranch back. It was his name restored. All he had to do was betray the woman who had saved him. All he had to do was feed the lie that the town was so hungry to believe. The machine was still turning. Reed was dead. But Vance was still rich, still powerful, still rewriting history to fit his ledger. Cal looked at the ranch house that his father had built. He looked at the grave of his brother on the hill. He looked at the attorney. "Tell Vance something for me," Cal said. Sterling raised a pen, ready to write. "Yes, tell him to go to hell," Cal said. Sterling blinked. "Mr. Hart, be reasonable. You are choosing ruin." "I am choosing to sleep at night," Cal said. "Now get off my land before I forget I'm a civilized man." Sterling stared at him, then snapped the reins. The carriage turned and rolled away, the black wheels crushing the dry grass. Cal watched it go. He felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He was ruined. He was penniless. And he was free. The morning of the departure was cold and clear. The sky was a piercing, fragile blue. Cal packed what he could carry on 2 pack mules. His rifle, his bedroll, a few books, the rest, the furniture, the plows, the history of his family. He left where it lay. He rode to the meeting place at the Needle Rock. Nayeli was waiting. She had brought 2 horses and a pack pony. She wore buckskins and the heavy coat Cal had given her. She had left her people at dawn, slipping away while the camp slept. She had left a feather on Taza's lodgepole, a sign that she was gone, but not dead. They looked at each other. There were no speeches. "Ready?" Cal asked. Nayeli looked back toward the north, toward the canyon where she had been a wife, a widow, and a warrior. She looked toward the smoke of the fires she would never sit by again. She turned her horse toward the south. "Let us ride," she said. They moved out. The landscape swallowed them. They rode through the mesquite flats, down into the wash, and up toward the red cliffs that marked the border. The journey would be brutal. The mountains of Mexico were lawless. Filled with bandits and revolutionaries, they would be strangers in a strange land. They would have to fight for every meal, for every mile. But as they crested the final ridge, looking down into the vast, shimmering haze of the southern desert, Cal looked at Nayeli. She was riding with her head high, her black hair streaming in the wind. She looked at him and smiled. It was a real smile, stripped of irony, stripped of fear. And in that moment, the title of the story that the town had woven, the scandalous tale of the rancher and the horses, dissolved into the dust. The 1,000 horses were gone. They were scattered across the reservation, carrying children, pulling plows, feeding families. They had been the currency of a lie, but they had purchased a truth. They had been the ugly language used to smuggle love into the daylight. Cal spurred his horse, bringing it alongside hers. He reached out and took her hand again. They rode like that, hand in hand, 2 small figures moving against the immense, uncaring scale of the West. They carried grief. They carried scars that would ache when it rained, but they also carried the stubborn, unbreakable decision to live. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to their struggle, but for the first time in a long time, the sunrise didn't look like judgment. It looked like a beginning. They rode into the horizon, and the dust closed in behind them, erasing their tracks, leaving only the legend to be whispered in the saloons of San Solano, the story of the man who sold 1,000 horses for one night and found a lifetime instead. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and blood of the borderlands, exploring how love can bloom in the harshest of soils. I hope Cal and Nayeli's fight for truth resonated with you. Please tell me in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the American frontier. I invite you to share your thoughts, feelings, and reflections on the ending in English. Did they make the right choice? Safe travels to you all.